Here's what gets me. When Jeffrey Dahmer was 4 years old, he had surgery to correct a double hernia. Simple procedure. Kids have it every day. But something changed after that surgery. The doctors said it went fine. The parents said he recovered fine. But the boy who came out of that recovery was not the same boy who went in. Energetic, curious, outgoing little Jeffrey Dahmer disappeared. In his place was a quiet, withdrawn, deeply strange child who seemed to stop connecting with people. Just like that. One surgery. One shift.
Before we dive into today's investigation, I want to be clear. The stories and theories shared on this channel are part of an alternative history exploration. We're digging into the unexplained, the unsettling, and the what-ifs of our world. Think of this as a journey into the dark side of history, part research, part legend. Watch with an open mind, but remember, this is for narrative and entertainment purposes only.
Picture this. Someone hands you a VHS tape. No label, no case, just a black cassette already rewound. You pop it in. The screen flickers, and suddenly you're looking at Milwaukee. Not the cleaned-up version. The real one. Rust on the gutters. Broken streetlights. The kind of neighborhood where people keep their heads down and their curtains closed. Now cut to New York. Glass towers. Power suits. Men with $500 haircuts arguing about business cards. Two completely different worlds. But here's the thing that's going to mess with your head tonight. Both of these places produced a monster. One of them is a movie. One of them is real. And before this is over, you're going to have a hard time telling which is which. Patrick Bateman. You know the name. The fictional Wall Street psychopath from American Psycho. Polished. Perfect. Absolutely terrifying in the way only a man with a flawless smile can be. He's a character. A symbol. A dark mirror aimed at yuppie culture. His violence is stylized, cinematic, almost beautiful in a disgusting way. He confesses to murder and nobody believes him. That's the whole joke. The whole horror. Jeffrey Dahmer. No joke. No symbol. No stylized camera angles. Just a chocolate factory worker from Milwaukee who did things so unspeakable that the police officers who opened his refrigerator on a random Tuesday night in 1991 had to go to therapy. His story doesn't come with a cool soundtrack. It comes with the smell of bleach and something rotting underneath it. These two names don't belong in the same sentence. But that's exactly why we need to put them there. Milwaukee, 1960. You're inside a house that feels like it's holding its breath. An infant named Jeffrey Dahmer is crying. His mother, Joyce, is somewhere between a nervous breakdown and the kitchen floor. She's depressed in a way that nobody talks about in 1960. His father, Lionel, is a chemistry student who's never home. The arguments are constant. The attention for the baby is almost non-existent. Now flip to the other side of that coin. Patrick Bateman's upbringing is never really shown to us. And that's the point. It's implied wealth, implied privilege, implied emotional emptiness wrapped in the best education money can buy. Nobody neglected Patrick. Or maybe everybody did, just in an expensive way. There's no screaming in his house. Just silence and entitlement. Two different kinds of broken. Here's what gets me. When Jeffrey Dahmer was 4 years old, he had surgery to correct a double hernia. Simple procedure. Kids have it every day. But something changed after that surgery. The doctors said it went fine. The parents said he recovered fine. But the boy who came out of that recovery was not the same boy who went in. Energetic, curious, outgoing little Jeffrey Dahmer disappeared. In his place was a quiet, withdrawn, deeply strange child who seemed to stop connecting with people. Just like that. One surgery. One shift. Was it trauma? Was it neglect? Was it the combination of a medically vulnerable moment and parents too wrapped up in their own chaos to notice their son pulling away? We don't know. But here's what we do know. The seed was planted, and nobody in that house stopped to water anything good. Okay, You have to picture this exactly. You're a kid in suburban Ohio in the late 1960s. Lots of woods behind the houses. Kids are outside all day. Normal stuff. But then there's this one boy who spends a lot of time behind the house. Not playing. Not building forts. He's crouched over something in the dirt. You get closer. He's got a butterfly. Not alive. He's studying how the wings attach to the body. Pulling things apart. Slowly. Not in a cruel way exactly. More like a scientist who can't help himself. That boy is going to grow up and become the man whose apartment I'm about to describe to you in detail. And you need to understand that it started here. In the woods. With dead things. The wooden shed behind the Dahmer family home became his laboratory. He started with roadkill. Things he found on the side of the road. Raccoons. Birds. Squirrels. He'd bring them back and he'd take them apart. He wanted to know how they fit together. That's what he told people later. He just wanted to know how they fit. There was a wooden board nailed to a tree behind that shed. Things were pinned to it. I don't want to describe everything that was on that board. Now compare that to Patrick Bateman. Bateman's obsession is surfaces, presentation, the way a business card feels between your fingers, the exact angle of his jawline in the mirror. He never wants to know what's underneath. He wants to control what's on the outside. These two obsessions are going to eventually lead them both to the same dark destination, coming from completely opposite directions. That's the thing that should keep you up at night. I want you to imagine you're sitting at the Dahmer kitchen table in 1970. It's a regular Tuesday night. Joyce made chicken. Lionel is talking about his work at the lab. Jeffrey, maybe 10 years old, is picking at his food. He asks a question. He asks what would happen if you put chicken bones in bleach. Lionel's face lights up. Finally, his son is showing interest in chemistry, in science, in the kind of curiosity that runs in the family. So Lionel Dahmer sits down with his son and teaches him. Not how to hurt anything, just chemistry, how acids break down organic material, how bleach strips bone, how you can preserve things, make them last longer. It was a father-son bonding moment. Lionel talked about it himself later in the book he wrote after everything came out. He said he thought his son was finally connecting with him through science. He had no idea he was handing Jeffrey Dahmer the instruction manual. That's the gut punch of this whole story. Dahmer's primary method for dissolving human remains later in life came directly from an afternoon in the family kitchen with his well-meaning chemistry professor father. There was no evil in that room. Just a dad and a kid and an accidental lesson that would echo for decades. Patrick Bateman had no such moment. Nobody passed anything down to him. No warmth, no connection, no accidental gifts. Just money and absence. Dahmer got something real from his father. He just used it in a way that would destroy Lionel for the rest of his life. High school. For most kids, it's awkward. Bad haircuts, bad decisions, trying to figure out who you are. For Jeffrey Dahmer, it was something much darker. By the time he hit his teens, the kid who used to take apart animals in a shed was now doing something else. He was drinking. Seriously drinking. Not sneaking a beer at a party. By age 14, he was smuggling hard liquor inside a hollowed-out section of his jacket lining just to get through the school day. Think about that image. A 14-year-old boy, standing at his locker, pulling a flask from his jacket before first period. Teachers walked by him. Classmates saw it. Some of them thought it was funny. The class clown. Dahmer was known for doing impressions, faking seizures, making loud scenes in the hallways to get a reaction. He called it doing a Dahmer. People laughed. Nobody asked why he needed to perform so hard. Nobody asked why he was drunk before math class. Now picture Patrick Bateman's morning routine. Moisturizers, face masks, the exact right tie, the exact right suit. everything controlled, everything curated. The performance of sanity done at a luxury level. Both of these men were performing. Both of them were hiding. But Dahmer's version was so visible, so desperate, so clearly wrong, and nobody said a word. That's the thing about small towns, about schools, about people in general. We see what we want to see. A funny kid acting out. A troubled teen going through a phase. Not a predator in the making. Not a boy whose mind was already going somewhere so dark that no amount of bleach was ever going to clean it out. You need to understand the setup here because it matters. Jeffrey Dahmer's parents are getting divorced. It is messy and bitter and loud. His father has already left the house. His mother has taken his younger brother and driven off to Wisconsin, leaving 18-year-old Jeffrey completely alone in the family home in Bath Township, Ohio. Not for a night, for weeks. 18 years old, no supervision, no food, no money, and a mind that has been rotting quietly since he was a small child in a shed. June 18th. He's driving. He sees a hitchhiker. His name is Stephen Hicks, 19 years old, tan, happy, on his way to a concert. Dahmer pulls over and offers him beer. Hicks gets in. They go back to the empty house. They drink. They talk. And then Hicks says he wants to leave. There's no Hollywood music here. No dramatic lighting. What happens next is ugly and fast and awful. Dahmer picks up a 10-pound dumbbell from the floor and hits Hicks from behind. Then he strangles him. Then Stephen Hicks is gone. That's it. That's how it starts. Not with a plan. Not with a manifesto. With loneliness and a dumbbell and a boy who didn't want to be left alone again. Bateman's kills are choreographed. Deliberate. Almost theatrical. He knows what he's doing and why. This was different. This was a teenager who panicked because someone was walking out the door. The terrifying truth is that the monster started not from evil, but from need. He buried Stephen Hicks in the crawl space under the family house. Then he tried to live with it, went on with his life. Summer turned to fall. He started Ohio State University. He was officially a college student. He had buried a human being in the dirt beneath the floor he walked on every day, and he went to class. But the body didn't stay buried. Weeks later, Dahmer went back. He dug Hicks up, and what he did next is one of the most disturbing things I've had to put into research. He used the acid knowledge his father gave him to strip the flesh. Then he used a sledgehammer to crush the bones into small pieces. Then he drove to a remote stretch of woods and scattered everything. He spread Stephen Hicks across the ground until there was almost nothing left. Now think about Patrick Bateman. In American Psycho, bodies disappear almost magically. One scene, body. Next scene, clean apartment. The movie doesn't linger on the logistics. It doesn't show you the smell, the weight, the hours of exhausted, terrified labor it takes to make a human being stop existing. Dahmer's version required tools. Sweat, a sledgehammer, multiple trips. His hands in things I won't describe. The real version of what Bateman does off-screen. This is the difference between fiction and reality. Fiction gives you the fantasy of control, clean cuts, no consequences. Reality gave Jeffrey Dahmer blisters, trauma, and a secret so heavy it bent his entire life sideways from that moment on. Ohio State University lasted 1 semester. His GPA was 0.45. Not a typo. 0.45. He showed up drunk to tests. He barely attended class. He was spending his student loan money entirely on alcohol. Lionel Dahmer, desperate to do something, anything to get his son back on track, pushed him to enlist in the army. And Jeffrey Dahmer, with nowhere else to go and nothing else to lose, agreed. Here's where I need you to stop for a second and really sit with this. The United States Army, in 1979, took a man who had already committed murder, who was a severe alcoholic at 18, who had ground a human body into powder with a sledgehammer and trained him as a combat medic. Not a desk job, a medic, someone responsible for keeping people alive under fire. The army had no idea what they were getting. He was stationed in West Germany. By all accounts, he did his job adequately when sober. But the accusations started accumulating. Other soldiers later came forward to say Dahmer had drugged them, that he had assaulted them while they were unconscious. The same pattern, the same playbook, starting years before the apartment on North 25th Street. And Patrick Bateman? He glides into Pierce & Pierce investment banking on effortless family connections. The system of privilege wraps around him like a tailored suit. But here's what both stories share. Institutions protected them. The army, the banking world. Systems designed to look the other way when the person fits well enough on the surface. The army discharged him in 1981. Not honorably, not dishonorably, just done. Too much drinking, too many problems, not enough usefulness anymore. And Dahmer ended up in Miami. Not because he had a plan. Not because Miami meant anything to him. He just drifted there the way broken things drift. To warmth. To somewhere nobody knew his name. He found work at a sandwich shop near the beach. He slept for a while at a hotel, eating just enough to get by, spending the rest on liquor. Miami wasn't salvation. Miami was just a different backdrop for the same slow collapse. He got evicted. He slept on the beach. He watched the tourists go by in their rental cars with their families and their plans and their whole futures mapped out ahead of them. He had nothing. He was 21 years old and he had absolutely nothing. Now take Patrick Bateman at 21. Harvard. Connections. The golden path laid out before him like a red carpet that never ends. Even his psychological emptiness is funded. His meaninglessness comes with a corner office. His darkness has an excellent expense account. And here's the thing that I keep coming back to. Dahmer wasn't a criminal genius. He wasn't a master manipulator. He was a deeply sick, deeply lonely man who couldn't hold himself together long enough to build any kind of normal life. The monster we're about to follow for the next 20 chapters? He started on a Miami beach, alone and broke, with sand in his shoes and nothing inside him but hunger and desperation. His father rescued him from Miami and sent him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. Catherine Dahmer was a quiet, sweet, religious woman who genuinely loved her grandson and wanted to help him turn things around. She gave him a room. She cooked for him. She brought him to church. She believed in redemption the way only someone who's never looked into the eyes of the thing that needs redeeming truly can. And Dahmer played the part. He got a job at a blood plasma center. He showed up on time. He was polite to the neighbors. He went to church on Sundays. From the outside, if you squinted and didn't look too hard, you could almost see a young man getting his life together. You could almost believe the story he was selling. But I need you to picture the house at night. Grandmother upstairs in her bedroom, the TV going softly, a cup of tea on the nightstand, and somewhere in that same house, behind closed doors, Jeffrey Dahmer is feeding something that doesn't have a polite name. The compulsions didn't disappear in West Allis. They just went underground. They put on church clothes. This is the domestic horror that fiction almost never captures right. Patrick Bateman's penthouse is the setting of his monstrousness. Fits him. It reflects him. But Dahmer's grandmother's house, with its floral wallpaper and smell of Sunday dinner, is a setting that belongs to something gentle and good. The contrast doesn't cancel each other out. It makes everything so much worse. Milwaukee had a gay bathhouse scene in the mid-1980s. Dahmer found it, and what he discovered there terrified even him. I think on some level he couldn't fully process. He found men who would go with him. He found a space where his particular hunger was less visible. But what he also found was that intimacy, real intimacy, the kind where another person is awake and present and talking, was unbearable to him. The men talked too much. That's how he described it later. They were talking too much. So he started crushing sleeping pills into their drinks. Not to hurt them, that's what he said. Just to quiet them. Just to have someone there warm and present and still, without the terrifying vulnerability of actual human connection. Sit with that for a second. He drugged men because he wanted company without conversation. He wanted the closeness without the risk. He wanted a body that couldn't leave and couldn't judge and couldn't say the wrong thing. That's not evil in the Hollywood sense. That's something lonelier and more pathetic and honestly more frightening than anything Hollywood typically puts on screen. Patrick Bateman's dominance is about power and performance. He wants control because he enjoys control. Dahmer's need was different. He needed control because human connection, the real thing, was something his broken wiring could not process safely. Two different hungers. Two different expressions of the same fundamental disease. One of them fictional. One of them was at a bathhouse in Milwaukee doing things that got him banned, and still he kept going back. November 1987. He meets a man at a bar. 25 years old. A stranger. A willing companion for the night. Dahmer books a hotel room. His plan, he will say later, was the same as always. Drug him. Spend the night with someone unconscious. Wake up before anything bad happens. He genuinely believed, or told himself he believed, that this was manageable. That he had it under control. He woke up with a bruise forming on his forearm. His hand was throbbing. The man beside him was dead. His chest caved in. Dahmer had no memory of what happened between the drink and the morning light. None. He sat on the edge of that hotel bed staring at what his hands had done while the rest of him was asleep. This is the detail that separates Dahmer from every fictional version of a killer. Patrick Bateman plans his murders. He brings the tools. He follows the steps. He is present and deliberate and in control of every second of every act. Dahmer murdered someone and didn't know he'd done it until he woke up next to the body. There's a horror in that kind of dissociation that is almost impossible to write into fiction because it doesn't make dramatic sense. A villain who blacks out is not a satisfying villain. But a real person who blacks out and wakes up next to a corpse is something much more frightening than satisfying. The monster inside him had been waiting for the right moment. And it had found one while Jeffrey Dahmer was asleep. He packed the body into a large suitcase. Not a duffel bag. A hard-sided piece of luggage. The kind people check at airports. He loaded it into his car and drove it to his grandmother's house in West Allis because he had nowhere else to go. And then, and this is the part that gets me every single time, he left it in the basement for a week. Unopened. Just sitting there. In Catherine Dahmer's basement. She was upstairs. She made him dinner that week. She asked how work was going. She probably offered him dessert. And in the basement beneath her feet was a suitcase that contained what used to be a 25-year-old man. Eventually Dahmer went back down. He took the body out and did what he'd learned to do. He dismembered it. He used the acid. He used a sledgehammer on the bones. He put the remains in the household trash, mixed in with coffee grounds and vegetable peels and everything else the household produced that week. The garbage truck came. The men tossed the bags into the back. They drove away. Patrick Bateman's world has cleaners, fixers, off-screen solutions. His mess disappears between chapters. Dahmer's mess went out with the Tuesday trash in bags his grandmother might have carried to the curb herself. This is the difference between a metaphor and a man. The metaphor is clean. The man is in the basement at midnight with a sledgehammer and a suitcase and the weight of something that no amount of bleach will ever fully lift from the floor. He wanted to keep the skull. That was the new development after the hotel room. The killings were changing something in him, deepening whatever need drove them, and now he wanted something to hold on to. Something permanent. Proof. Company. He wasn't sure what exactly, but he wanted the skull. So he tried to preserve it. He boiled it with a cleaning product called Soilax and bleach, the same basic chemistry his father had taught him in the family kitchen years before. He followed the steps. He thought he had it right. He'd done this with animal skulls as a kid. How different could it be? The skull became brittle, cracked apart in his hands. He held the pieces and stared at them, and this is the part nobody in a horror movie ever shows you. The failure. The incompetence. The pathetic reality of a man who can't even successfully preserve what he has done because he never fully learned the right method. He just had fragments of a lesson taught in innocence, applied in horror, executed badly. Bateman's trophies are implied and perfect. His control never slips in ways that feel small and stupid and human. He would never ruin a skull by miscalculating the bleach. His failure mode is existential. Dahmer's failure mode was a botched chemistry experiment in his grandmother's basement that left him holding a handful of bone fragments and nothing to show for the enormous weight of what he'd done. He would keep trying to get it right. He would get better at it eventually. But that first attempt is the image that stays with me. Not the monster, the failed student. I want to stop here. I need you to stop here with me, because what comes next is not something to glide over. In September 1987, Dahmer approached a 14-year-old Native American boy who had been working as a sex worker near a Milwaukee bus station. The boy was trafficked, vulnerable, one of the kids that the city had already decided not to see. Dahmer offered him $50. The boy's name was Jamie Dockstader. He was 14 years old. He had a life and a family and everything that was supposed to come after that. Everything that gets stolen when someone takes a child who has already been failed by every system that was supposed to protect them. Dahmer drugged him, strangled him, dismembered the body in the basement. Nothing was kept. Jamie Dockstader was 15 when his family reported him missing. There is nothing to compare to Patrick Bateman here. Bateman's targets in the novel are yuppies, sex workers portrayed with dark satirical distance, nameless bodies that serve the story's critique. Whatever commentary Ellis was making, it comes wrapped in enough artistic distance to allow for analysis. Jamie Dockstader does not get artistic distance. He gets a bus station and $50 and the kind of ending that makes you want to put this script down and walk away from the whole thing. But that's the point. That's why we're here. The glamorization of killers, the Batemanification of genuine monsters, costs something. It costs us the ability to see the Jamies. The kids already abandoned by the world before someone like Dahmer ever found them. March 1988. Another man. Another night. Another set of steps carried out in the same deliberate, increasingly practiced sequence. Drugged. Strangled. Dismembered. By this point, the process is becoming something Dahmer has refined. Terrible as that word is to use here. Refined. He knows the quantities now. He knows the timing. He's getting better at the parts that used to go wrong. But here is the detail that makes this chapter distinct, and it makes me feel sick to even say it. When Dahmer preserved the skull this time, he was more successful. He kept it in his work locker at the Ambrosia Chocolate Company. And years later, investigators found notes, informal records of which trophies he kept and why. The reasoning behind who he preserved was based almost entirely on physical appearance. He didn't find this victim attractive enough. So the skull was kept for a while and then discarded. That was the calculation. A human life weighed against Dahmer's aesthetic preferences and found wanting. Thrown away. Patrick Bateman is explicitly obsessed with physical perfection. The novel beats you over the head with it. Muscle definition. Skin care regimen. The precise cut of someone's jawline. His violence is tangled up in his vanity in ways the book dissects with cold precision. But Bateman is fiction, and his superficiality is the satire. Dahmer's superficiality was applied to real human beings who were already dead and couldn't do anything about being found insufficient. That's not satire. That's the ugliest possible thing. April 1988. He has a man drugged in the basement. I don't know if you've been counting, but I need you to understand that all of this is still happening in his grandmother's house. In West Allis, on a quiet residential street, the man is unconscious downstairs, and Dahmer is upstairs trying to act normal. And then his grandmother calls down the stairs. She needs something. She wants to check on him. Maybe she heard something. Maybe it was just routine. The specific reason doesn't matter. What matters is that Jeffrey Dahmer was standing in his grandmother's house, listening to her voice from above, with an unconscious man in the basement who was not yet dead. He picked the man up, got him into his car while his grandmother was occupied, drove to a hospital and left the man there, semi-conscious and confused, outside the emergency room. The man survived. He had no real memory of what happened. He didn't know whose car he'd been in or who had left him there. Dahmer drove home, went inside, had dinner with his grandmother. Patrick Bateman's near misses are farcical. The detective who never quite catches him. The business cards that fail to distinguish him from his co-workers. The confessions that nobody believes. The novel uses these brushes with consequence to satirize a world where the privileged simply don't get caught. Dahmer's near-miss was a man dumped at a hospital door and a grandmother who didn't go to the basement. The margin was razor thin, and he walked back into that house and sat down at the table, and whatever Catherine Dahmer served him for dinner, he ate it and he said thank you. His grandmother kicked him out eventually. The smells from the basement had gotten bad enough that even a loving grandmother with no desire to suspect the worst had to admit something was wrong. He moved into his own apartment. He was free. No supervision. No shared walls with someone he cared about protecting. Just a front door with a lock and whatever he wanted to do on the other side of it. He was arrested the very next day. Not for murder. Not for anything related to the bodies and the bones and the suitcases. He was arrested for fondling a 13-year-old boy in public. He pled guilty. And here is where the system, the beautiful, functional, designed to protect system, had its chance. He was a convicted sex offender. He had a prior arrest record. He was clearly unstable. He was clearly dangerous. The court gave him 5 years probation and a work release permit. He had to check in with a probation officer regularly. He had to keep a job. And that was it. That was the response. This moment is the real American Psycho. Not a fictional banker getting away with murder because everyone around him is too self-absorbed to look up from their own reflections. A real man, convicted, documented, observed, getting sent back into the world with a check-in schedule because the system was too broken, too overwhelmed, or too indifferent to actually stop what was standing right in front of it. Bateman escapes justice through satire. Dahmer escaped it through paperwork. He went back to his grandmother's house during the probation period, and in November 1988, he killed again. The victim was Anthony Sears, 24 years old, an aspiring model who was described by everyone who knew him as genuinely kind and full of potential. Dahmer met him at a bar, brought him to Catherine Dahmer's house while she was asleep, did what he had now done multiple times in that basement. He kept the skull. He kept it in his locker at the Ambrosia Chocolate Company, where he worked the late shift. I need you to hold that image for a moment, because it is one of the most surreal details in this entire story. Jeffrey Dahmer, chocolate factory, night shift, human skull in the locker next to his work boots. The factory produced something sweet. The man inside it was carrying something that has no opposite. His coworkers said he was quiet, reliable enough, showed up when he was supposed to, didn't cause trouble. The skull in his locker never rattled. The bones never spoke. The factory floor was loud with machinery, and nobody heard anything underneath it. Patrick Bateman's day job is the explicit point of American Psycho. The financial industry as the machinery of sociopathy. The suit and the business card as the armor of the hollow man. But there's something about a chocolate factory that lands differently. Something about sweetness being manufactured in the same building where a dead man's skull sits in a metal locker. Fiction couldn't write that without it feeling too on the nose. Reality doesn't care about being on the nose. May 1990. Dahmer moves into apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments, 924 North 25th Street, Milwaukee. $300 a month. 1 bedroom, kitchen, a bathroom with a tub. Located in one of the higher crime areas of the city, a neighborhood where police were called regularly, where neighbors minded their business out of necessity, where the ordinary sounds of distress could blend into the background noise of a difficult block. If you took Patrick Bateman's apartment and put it through a machine that stripped away every dollar and every square foot and every trace of glass and steel and replaced it with water-stained ceiling tiles and thin walls and a refrigerator that hummed too loud, you'd get something close to 213. Not in layout, in function. Both men now had a space that was entirely their own. No grandmother upstairs. No probation officer in the next room. Just a door, a lock, and whatever happened on the other side. The smell started within weeks. Neighbors noticed it in the hallway. A sweet, thick, wrong smell that you couldn't quite place and didn't want to. Some described it as garbage. Some said it was something like chemicals. One neighbor knocked on the door and asked if everything was okay. Dahmer said his freezer was broken and some meat had gone bad. He was sorry about the smell. He would take care of it. The neighbor went back inside. They were satisfied enough. That's not stupidity. That's the human instinct to accept the most normal available explanation, because the alternative is something nobody wants to be right about. He bought a camera, Polaroid, the kind that spits out the photo right there, instant, tangible, something you can hold in your hand. And he began documenting everything. He would pose his victims in specific positions before and after death. He would photograph the process of dismemberment step by step. He would photograph the arrangements he made with the remains. He built a collection. This is his mirror. This is the equivalent of Bateman standing in front of the bathroom mirror during the most intimate moments of his narrative, using his own reflection as the audience for everything he does. Dahmer's Polaroids were his reflection. They were proof. They were company. They were the only way he could look at what he had done and feel, however briefly, that it was real and permanent and his. The photos were also going to be his undoing. But he didn't know that yet. He kept them in a box in his bedroom. He took them out and looked at them. They were organized, specific. The collection of a man who needed evidence that the things he'd done had actually happened. Patrick Bateman's violence, in the book's most nightmarish interpretation, may not have happened at all. The whole novel plays with that question. Did he do it? Is it in his head? The ambiguity is the artistic point. Dahmer had no ambiguity. The photos were physical, chemical, undeniable. He was the opposite of the unreliable narrator. He was a man who needed to prove to himself again and again that this was real. The box in the bedroom was the proof. He looked at it often. You know how in movies, the villain always has a perfectly equipped workspace. Everything laid out neatly. The tools of the trade arranged with professional precision. The space that reflects the mind behind it, ordered and deliberate and chilling in its efficiency. Dahmer tried to dry a skull in his oven. The skull exploded. I want you to sit with that for a moment. He opened the oven door and there were pieces everywhere. On the racks, on the inside of the oven door, on the floor of the kitchen in apartment 213. He had miscalculated something. Too much moisture, too much heat, too fast. Basic physics. The kind of thing a patient, methodical person would have researched first. The kind of thing his father, the chemist, would have known to avoid. This is what real psychosis looks like when it lives inside an ordinary life. It's not clean. It's not calculated. It's a man on his knees on a kitchen floor in Milwaukee at 2 in the morning, picking pieces of bone out of the oven racks, trying to figure out what went wrong. Bateman's penthouse is a stage set. Every prop serves the aesthetic. Every element of his environment is an extension of his character's control. Dahmer was ruining his kitchen appliances. He was making mistakes and correcting them and making new mistakes. He was an amateur doing something with no instruction manual, learning entirely through trial and error, in a rental apartment in a bad neighborhood, hoping the neighbors wouldn't notice the smell coming from the oven. Until 1991, Dahmer had a pattern. The drugs, the unconscious victim, the control of a situation where the other person could not react or resist or be present in any way that he couldn't manage. He needed that distance. He needed the passivity. The few times it hadn't gone according to plan had resulted in escalation he hadn't intended. He was, in his own terrible way, trying to stay within a system. Then a man from Chicago came to the apartment and demanded more money for sexual acts than Dahmer wanted to pay. An argument, real conflict, a person standing in his space being difficult and loud and present in exactly the way Dahmer couldn't handle. And he didn't have enough sleeping pills. He cut the man's throat, let him bleed out on the floor. It was fast and brutal and nothing like his usual approach. And something about that shift, from passive to active, from controlled to impulsive, is where his story starts to accelerate toward the ending. The careful, methodical approach had been a kind of psychological buffer between him and the full truth of what he was. When the buffer broke, what came out looked a lot more like what we imagine when we imagine a monster. Bateman's violence is explicitly impulsive and performative. He acts on mood, on perceived slights, on the whim of a man who has never been told no. The two men are converging in this chapter, not because Dahmer became more like Bateman, but because whatever had been holding Dahmer's particular kind of darkness at arm's length was finally giving out. I have to tell you about Konorak Synthesumphone. He was 14 years old, a Laotian immigrant. He had a family who loved him. He had a whole life ahead of him. And one night in May 1991, Dahmer brought him to apartment 213, drugged him, and then, while Konorak was still breathing, drilled a hole into the boy's skull with a hand drill and injected muriatic acid directly into his brain. The stated goal, according to Dahmer's own confession, was to create a zombie, someone permanently present, permanently passive, unable to leave or resist or want anything for themselves. He wanted a companion who could never walk out the door. He had said in earlier chapters of his story that he hated the moment people left. This was his attempt at a solution. This was his broken, monstrous attempt at solving the problem of loneliness. The boy survived this. Temporarily. He was in terrible pain. He wandered outside. And that's where I have to stop and tell you that what happened next belongs in its own chapter. Because what happened next involved police officers who had the chance to end everything. Who had this child standing in front of them. Who chose to believe a grown man over the boy bleeding in the street. American Psycho has a lot to say about systems that protect the powerful and discard everyone else. But Ellis wrote it as satire. What happened to Konorak Synthesumphone was not satire. It was a real child in real pain asking real officers for help. And they handed him back. I've been in the building in my head so many times while researching this. I've walked the hallways in my imagination. I've tried to understand what the people who lived at the Oxford apartments were dealing with, what they were smelling, what they were hearing, and why the outcome was what it was. They complained. Constantly, the apartment manager got calls and visits and written notes about the smells coming from 213, about strange sounds late at night, about what one neighbor described as something falling heavily, repeatedly, in the unit above her, about a chainsaw. More than one neighbor mentioned a sound that resembled a chainsaw coming from the apartment. Not once, multiple times over multiple months. The apartment manager went to Dahmer. Dahmer explained, broken freezer, dead tropical fish. The smell was from spoiled meat. He was sorry. He would handle it. He was polite. He was calm. He had a reasonable voice and a cooperative demeanor, and he stood in the doorway of his apartment like a man with nothing to hide. And every single time people accepted it. Not because they were foolish, because the alternative, what they would have had to believe if they didn't accept it, was too extreme to hold. Nobody wants to be the person who calls the police on their neighbor because they think he might be doing something unspeakable. Nobody wants to be wrong about something that terrible. So you accept the broken freezer explanation. You go back to your own apartment. You turn up your TV. And the man in 213 goes back inside. May 26, 1991. You need to remember this date. Konarak synthesomphone, the 14-year-old boy with a drill hole in his skull and acid in his brain, escaped Dahmer's apartment. He made it to the street. He was naked. He was bleeding from his head. He was clearly, visibly, undeniably in crisis. 3 women found him: Sandra Smith, Nicole Childress, and Glenda Cleveland. They stayed with him. They called 911. They tried to tell the officers what they saw, what they believed, what they knew in their bones was wrong about this situation. They said the boy looked young. They said he was hurt. They said the man who came to claim him made them feel afraid. Officers John Balcerzak and Joseph Gabriel Gabrish arrived on scene. They decided it was a domestic dispute between adult partners. They did not run Konarak's name through the system, which would have shown he was a missing child reported by his family. They accepted Dahmer's explanation. They walked the bleeding boy back to apartment 213. They left. Konarak synthesomphone was murdered that night. Patrick Bateman's great satirical point is that a system built on surfaces will never look underneath them. That a confident white man in an expensive suit can confess to anything and still be believed over everyone else in the room. Ellis wrote that as fiction about 1980's Wall Street. What happened on that Milwaukee street in 1991 was the same thesis, applied to a child, with real consequences that no ironic ending could ever undo. July 22, 1991. Tracy Edwards was 32 years old. He agreed to go back to Dahmer's apartment. He sat on the couch, and almost immediately, he knew something was wrong. The smell hit him first. Then he noticed the drum, a 57-gallon blue steel drum in the corner of the living room. He didn't know what was in it. He didn't want to know. But something in his body had already figured it out. Dahmer put a handcuff on one of his wrists. Edwards kept calm. He kept talking. He asked to use the bathroom. Dahmer let him go. Edwards looked around the bathroom for anything useful and found nothing. He went back out. Dahmer was watching The Exorcist 3 on the television and rocking back and forth and speaking in a strange, flat voice about the things he was going to do. Edwards watched him carefully. He waited, and then he punched Jeffrey Dahmer in the face. Hard. He ran. He got out the door with one handcuff still dangling from his wrist, and he ran into the street and he flagged down a police car and he said the words that changed everything. Officers Robert Roth and Rolf Mueller went back to the apartment with Edwards. Dahmer tried to talk his way out of it the same way he always had. Polite, calm. The broken freezer explanation for everything. And this time it didn't work. Because Tracy Edwards was standing right there, and Tracy Edwards was alive, and Tracy Edwards was not going to let anyone walk away until somebody opened that drawer. They went inside. Dahmer was already in handcuffs. Officer Mueller went to get the key to remove the handcuffs from Tracy Edwards' wrist. He noticed an open dresser drawer. Inside were Polaroid photographs. He looked at them, and then he called out to his partner because he needed another person to confirm that what he was looking at was real. Then they opened the refrigerator. The head was on the bottom shelf. A human head, wrapped loosely, recent enough that there was no question it had been alive very recently. Dahmer, when the officers reacted, said, quote, "I'll kill you. I'll eat your heart." That was the mask coming off completely. The polite, cooperative man who had talked his way out of so much was gone. What came next was methodical documentation of something that required a special team and many hours. For severed heads in the apartment. 7 skulls, some painted, some bleached. 2 complete skeletons. Preserved organs in containers. A 57-gallon drum containing a human torso dissolving in acid. Photographs of every stage of every crime he had committed. A freezer with body parts arranged with the kind of care you'd give something precious. Bateman's apartment, at its most nightmarish, is a fantasy of gore that the novel may or may not be presenting as real. The uncertainty is the art. Apartment 213 was documented, cataloged, and photographed by forensic teams over multiple days. There was no uncertainty. There was no artistic ambiguity. There was only the reality of what one human being had assembled in a $300 a month apartment while the rest of Milwaukee went to work. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Dahmer had already confessed to 15 murders. His defense was not that he didn't do it. His defense was that he was legally insane and could not be held responsible. The prosecution argued that he planned his crimes, cleaned up after them, avoided detection deliberately, and knew exactly what he was doing. The jury agreed with the prosecution. 15 counts of murder. Life in prison plus 70 years. Wisconsin had abolished the death penalty, so this was the maximum the state could give. He went to Columbia Correctional Institution and was initially kept in solitary confinement for his own protection. Other inmates had already made it clear they had opinions about what should happen to Jeffrey Dahmer. Patrick Bateman's story ends in ambiguity. The final pages of American Psycho offer no resolution, no punishment, no catharsis. Bateman continues. He exists in an endless loop of the same hollow, violent, meaningless days. There's an argument that this is the most terrifying ending possible. The monster uncontained. The monster rewarded with continuation. Dahmer got a concrete cell, a fixed schedule, meals at specific times, an existence stripped of every freedom and every pleasure and every pretense. He converted to Christianity in prison. He expressed remorse. Whether that remorse was genuine is a question that belongs to philosophers and the families of his victims and perhaps to no one else. What we can say is that the man who had spent decades trying to prevent people from leaving was now in a place he would never leave. There's a particular shape to that irony that I don't have clean words for. November 28, 1994. Dahmer was on a work detail with 2 other inmates at the Columbia Correctional Institution. The 3 men were assigned to clean a bathroom. The guard left them alone for about 20 minutes. When the guard returned, Jeffrey Dahmer was on the floor of that bathroom with severe head trauma. The other inmate, Christopher Scarver, had beaten him with a 20-inch metal bar taken from an exercise machine. Scarver later said that God had told him to do it. He made no attempt to hide what he'd done or escape. He simply put down the bar and waited. Here's the detail that I keep coming back to. Here's the thing that the people who knew him, who studied him, who had interviewed him repeatedly, who had asked him every possible version of every question, kept returning to in the days after. As Christopher Scarver beat him, as the blows landed, Jeffrey Dahmer made no sound. He didn't cry out. He didn't beg. He didn't fight back. He just went down and went quiet, and that was the end. And here is where I leave you. Patrick Bateman is immortal. He's in the cultural bloodstream permanently. He gets reposted, remixed, quoted. He's on t-shirts. He's a Halloween costume. He is the glamorized face of the thing we're drawn to even when we know we shouldn't be. And Jeffrey Dahmer? He died on a bathroom floor in Wisconsin, making no noise, asking nothing of anyone, which is honestly the most revealing thing he ever did. One of them lives forever in fiction. The other one left the world the same way he moved through it, quietly, without permission, and without a single word of explanation.